But you can kind of start by shooting yourself in the foot by doing something that might not actually have a massive impact on your overall carbon emissions or make an effective change within your company. If there's 3 people on the list for tender and one of them have the ESG metrics that I need and the other 2 don't, it's an automatic, I'm going to pick Tritech. And I'm saying, no. You don't need to just jump into action with sustainability. That's where it's going to become a cost. Let's start from the very start with Tritech, because I think it's a wonderful example of how synergy became the main focus of us, myself at Lawler Sustainability, providing sustainability services, and Tritech having that kind of, sustainability championship, or let's say a sustainable culture within the company, but maybe needing some direction or some sort of structure to moving forward with the work that they were already doing. So I had a personal event for Save the Planet Society in February last year. You were there. And after that, we got a lot of traction on LinkedIn. We were speaking about different aspects of sustainability communications and the importance of that within companies. And I had actually moved to Porto in March. And in March, I get a message on LinkedIn from Chris Duffy, who's a director at Tritech. Chris says, "I've seen all of this stuff. I think you're amazing. Let's have a call." So I'm walking through a park in Porto, and next thing I get a phone call from Chris, and I'll always remember it because I really thought this could be the start of something very exciting. And it was just so nice to get a call from that management level, director level, and say, "We see what you're doing. It's so raw. It's so lovely to see someone so passionate about sustainability. And we don't want to work with you." He didn't know what my history was from a professional level. He wanted to work with me and he wanted to work with Lawlers because he's seen how passionate I was about telling the sustainability story and about communicating sustainability. That's what really caught his eye. So we were talking, I was walking in a park, and I said, "Well, look, I'm just starting with this company, Lawler Sustainability, and if I think they'll be right for you, I'll bring you into discussions then." So it started as a personal connection and it built into a business connection between ourselves, Lawlers, and Tritech. And it's been a very long journey, nearly 2 years, oh my God. And it stemmed from having that, and I think it's something very unique, sustainability champion, which was Chris, on a director level within the company, and just saying, "Guys, this is something that we have to do. It's something they were doing stuff, but we have to structure it the right way." I mean, Tritech are growing as a company, and they're growing quite fast, which means that they are going to have to comply to a lot more sustainability requirements with CSRD and different requirements for exporting and moving abroad. So yeah, it was just a really lovely natural connection, a LinkedIn message, how some of the best communications start and relationships start, like me and yourself. And it's grown into quite an interesting project.
How can Tritech help their clients to achieve their ESG goals?
That's a great question. Well, I think a lot of what Tritech are doing in year one is really establishing sustainability as a core value in their company. Having different educational sessions with not only their own company, but also bringing in different people for CPDs or upskilling sessions that are also clients of Tritech. So I think that educational aspect is really underlooked in how much of an impact it can have, not only with their own company and with making sure that every single area in terms of operations are aware of their sustainability targets, not just the sustainability team, but also with their clients. So there's an awareness level that can be brought on there. And I think in the industry that Tritech are in, working on different standards and certifications will naturally bring that on with their clients because they're going to have to communicate this with them. And they're also likely going to have to work on different documentation stages with them. So yeah, I think communication is a massive part of how they can achieve that.
They were already doing things the right way, but they didn't have maybe the metrics in place to gather the data to tell the story. Would that be it?
That's exactly where it was. And I think, like you said, so they were already a part of the larger sustainability journey. I mean, they'd worked on lead projects. Anyone that's in the M&E space right now has sustainability on their agenda. If it's being pushed from a green certification point of view, if it's being pushed from an investor's demand, local directives and whatnot. If you're working in the building industry, you are coming to terms with some sort of sustainability certification, and that's just how it is right now. So with Tritech, they were doing a lot of the work, right? But the fact, and I think the treasure of having a sustainability consultant or somebody to maybe walk you through the steps of how to do that effectively is to peel back the work that you've already been doing and say, okay, where's the proof? Because that's where a lot of companies are struggling. And maybe that's where Tritech saw all our sustainability and said, okay, this is where we need you to jump in. We need to move forward very fastly, and we need to establish ourselves, communicate ourselves as sustainability leaders within our industry, which they are, and they do deserve to have that exposure.
Let's talk about why they need to establish themselves as sustainability. What is in it for them?
Everything. What's not in it for them? Establishing themselves as sustainability leaders within that industry naturally means that anybody going or looking for the type of services that Tritech provide are going to pick Tritech, right? And that's just how it breaks down. That's talking about anyone, not just talking about Tritech. If you are a thought leader or if you are a sustainable company, I don't want to say a sustainability company because essentially you're not. If you're a sustainable company within your industry, and if you are effectively proving that, not only communicating it, because everyone can communicate, which we both know, having the metrics to back that up and having the right structure in place, such as a plan to show that you're taking effective steps to meet certain targets by a certain timeline, and you're on track and your company knows about the different sustainability measures that you're taking, because that's something Tritech do a bit differently as well, naturally means that if I'm an investor or if I'm building a building and I need Tritech services, if there's 3 people on the list for tender and one of them have the ESG metrics that I need and the other 2 don't, it's an automatic, I'm going to pick Tritech.
So that's back to the CSRD again.
It's not only to CSRD, because Tritech are compliant from next year to report to CSRD. It's back to that ESG element, right? So whoever the company is, whoever that investor is, or whoever the bigger company is, they're going to be CSRD compliant. The likelihood is that they've already been SFRD compliant. They're going to have a lot more auditing than the likes of Tritech or any other competitor in the space are going to have. What they have to do is align with their best practices in terms of ESG as best as they possibly can. And I think that that's where maybe having someone like myself or another sustainability consultant or engineer on track brings them to that level, because we're able to have an oversight to say, a great example is, right, a company can come to us and say, well, we're going to change all our fleet to EV. We're going EV. We can then go in and do a carbon mapping, we call it, which is basically going in and establishing a company's baseline. And that's something that we're working on with Tritech at the minute. So we're looking at all their scope 1, 2 and 3, scope 3 emissions. Any sustainability professional looking at this is going to be thinking, oh my God, God help them, because it really is a headache at the minute. Again, lack of standard, lack of correct, like there's different sections for purchased goods. Let's say there's different sections that different standards stick to. So if I have purchased goods and it's in vehicles, what actually falls into that? Is it also the vehicles that people are driving to and from work, or is it just the vehicles that are purchased by the company and then left? There's a whole other aspect to that. But the real pinpoint is doing it as exact as you can, as quickly as you can. Because as soon as you do that, you're not making unconscious decisions anymore in your sustainability efforts. if they were to go purchase a full EV fleet and then we were to do the assessment and then they were actually to see that no, it's not your vehicles that are emitting your most carbon emissions and whatnot, so that's not going to actually make much of a difference. You actually first need to focus on your energy efficiency, or you need to focus on your waste or your water usage, or another aspect. Even right now we go into as much detail as fluorinated gases. That's not going to be an issue for Tritech. But if that was the case, just by doing that exercise, we all of a sudden have a map, right, that says vehicles are actually here and energy is way, way, way over here. So what sense would it make to focus on the smaller emitting area first? So that's what I think is really important for companies to do and to start on, is to get a professional's help like Tritech has. They've brought us on board and they've said, we need structure in our sustainability services. And I think that that's something that's really brave and really important for a company to do. To say, this is something we are so passionate about. We need to take action on this. We need to communicate. And that's where you guys come in as well in helping us on. We need to ensure that in the next 5 years going forward, we're not only making sure that we are sustainability leaders, that we stay consistent in sustainability leaders, and that we actually get ahead of the pack by making the right decisions now. And getting oversight on that is structuring the data and getting the correct help they need.
Carbon emission, energy efficiency, renewable energy, embodied carbon and waste. Tell me about the 5 pillars, okay? So you're working with Tritech to create a path with key milestones between now and the next 5 years to achieve certain targets. What are the pillars of your targets?
Starting with carbon, that starts with the first year of our 5-year plan. This is something that I think was a large discussion at the start with Tritech, okay? Because a lot of the times companies are being pushed from all these different areas in terms of sustainability. And that can be, a company coming in saying, you should be ISO 50001 certified. You should be this certified. You should be that certified. No, actually get your building LEED certified. And it's like, well, we'll do all these, but then you're going back to the operations, the actual intrinsic values of the company. And of course, those certifications are helpful at the right time, but you can kind of start by shooting yourself in the foot by doing something that might not actually have a massive impact on your overall carbon emissions or make an effective change within your company. First, when Tritech came to me, we looked at the different things that they were being prompted to do. And we peeled back the layers to see what made sense and when it made sense. So that's where sustainability strategy comes into play. And that part is so important, Tiffany. The amount of people that skip that part, that say, oh, well, in this year we're going to do this, and this year we're going to do this. And I'm saying, no. You don't need to just jump into action with sustainability. That's where it's going to become a cost. That's where it's not going to become something that you get massive returns on. You have to peel back the layers and you have to figure out what strategy is effective to you. And companies come to me all the time and they say, well, can you just give us a sustainability strategy? I'm like, no, because it's not a standard thing, and it's never going to be a standard thing that myself, or I think any company can just hand over to 10 companies at once. Because bespoke. It's bespoke, and it's always going to be bespoke. And standards, of course, will make alignment in actions, and they'll help align the actions that people are taking. But because we're at this kind of current stage where we're just moving into regulatory kind of audits and whatnot, we are still very much so at the stage where companies are picking up the slack, or else we have what we call kind of like ESG baseliners. So companies that are coming in and really you're starting from scratch, right? You have done some work, but as far as CSRD or ESG investors, or not ESG investors, ESG auditors are gonna see, you haven't done anything because you're not able to put pen to paper in terms of the work that you've done.
Okay, so they've targeted 5 to 10% reduction in CO2 emissions between now and 2009.
And the first step of that, and going back to the carbon, is we have to first establish what their actual baseline is. So that's The exercise that we're currently working on, again, if this started 2 or 3 years ago, of course, great, people have a baseline. But what we're also finding with other companies now is the SBTI targets have gotten more stringent. Every
What's
target,
SBTI?
Science-Based Targets Initiative. So it's a tracking emissions initiative that basically allows companies to establish, publicly promote their targets, and then the SBTI will keep you accountable for your emissions. So we're working on that with a few other companies as well. Now, that's again not a requirement. A company can still disclose targets and have an effective way to do that internally if they set up the right procedures without having to report to a specific certification like the SBTI or whoever else. So the first step is establishing a baseline. And like I said, 2 or 3 years ago, great, you have a baseline, but what we're finding is those requirements are so much more stringent now because you have this whole new level of scope 3 emissions. And people are getting more and more strict on how people are reporting their scope 3 emissions.
Okay, so the first one is carbon.
Yeah.
So you've established what the baseline is for this year.
Yeah.
And then between next year and 2029, you're going to have reduced that between 5 and 10%.
Yes.
Right? What are the strategies to reduce? Give me a quick overview of the strategies to reduce carbon emissions.
So with Tritech, we've established 5 different metrics that we're going to work on over the next 5 years as part of their 5-year plan. We are taking it year by year, but the different values that we've built into those different actions are across the areas of carbon emissions, renewable energy, energy efficiency, embodied carbon and waste. So by looking at those different areas, we're able to get a really good oversight and overview of the different intrinsic operations of Tritech that really are part of their emissions across scope 1, 2 and 3.
Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions.
Okay.
People are terrified, by the way, of scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions.
Well, scope 1 and 2 emissions are basically your traditional emissions. So the emissions that come from your visible on-site operations. So that would be the likes of your energy, your waste, your fluorinated gases, any heating that's being used on site, and any direct transport emissions. Your scope 3 emissions is where it gets a bit more wishy-washy, which people don't like to hear, and I think that that's what really scares people about scope 3 emissions. Things scare me about scope 3 emissions, and we've established a kind of software that can really help us with that, and we're working on that with Tritech.
Right, so scope 3, give it to me in one sentence like I'm a 3-year-old.
So your scope 3 emissions is effectively everything that you cannot see that's still part of your emissions. So a great example, if you were a 3-year-old, would be, I'm a business, right? I'm selling goods which I know that are going to have a carbon content. But what happens to those goods along the whole life cycle of their existence? So before they came to me, what were the raw materials that were used to extract them, to make them? What was the energy content then used to make the good? When the good got to me, I got it. What was it packed in? And then when the good goes to the end consumer, how long is it going to take before the end consumer is done with that good? And then how long is the good going to take to break down? So there's a whole life cycle to everything we use. And I think scope 3 emissions really hones in on how that is actually a certain person's responsibility. And I think it should be the responsibility of the person that's profiting off it at the end of the day. So that's why it falls into the responsibility of the business. Now, for a business like Tritech, scope 3 isn't as vast as it would be for, let's say, a retailer or a logistics company or someone who has goods that they physically have and then hand on, more physical goods, like retailers that would sell to end users. But one really nice thing about scope 3 is it also takes into consideration me and you sitting here and doing this, you know, like how the emissions of employees are also affecting the overall carbon emissions of a company. So if I drive to work and I'm driving up from Carlow, where I'm from, Carlow plug, if I'm driving up from Carlow, what are my yearly emissions if I'm driving up and back every single day, and then I'm also doing an inconvenient trip truck trip, I'm not a truck driver, but if I was a driver of goods for Tritech and dropping off at routes that make no sense, but it's just the way that something has been done for so long, is that truck using the most efficient level of fuel that they can be using? It's every single aspect of the operations along its lifeline and how things get to and from.
5 pillars: the carbon emissions targets, the energy efficiency, the renewable energy, the embodied carbon and the waste. Okay, so we've 5 pillars and we've big targets for some of these.
Mm-hmm. It'll be a combination of generation and I think hopefully depending on commercial energy as well. So like if the energy balance is going vastly towards renewable. Like, I mean, you can have Pinergy now and you can get 100% renewable energy certifications that are fully certified. And I know people like to say, well, not really, or this, that, or the other, but it is. And it's been proven that we actually are moving towards a more green energy supply. Tritech is very lucky to have a lot of space for PV and other renewable generation technologies on site. They're also lucky that because they're in the manufacturing space, there's a very big likelihood that there will be other technologies that come along the way in 5 years that we'll be able to benefit from. Like right now, we have the foil solar panels that can be wrapped around effectively anything. And we'll have other methods of generation, I think, that we will benefit off coming through the 5 years. But right now, the biggest plan is solar, and also will be hopefully moving over to 100% renewable energy provider as well for the rest of the balance.
The first step on the roadmap is calculating the baseline.
Yes.
So you're in the middle of calculating that data now,
Yeah.
gathering the data, producing a baseline. The second step then is CSRD compliance.
Yes. So the CSRD compliance is something that I'm working on with my clients at the minute and specific to Tritech. It's setting up the background work that has to be done in order to make CSRD as efficient as it possibly can be, right? With CSRD, everyone's doing it for the first time. So there's no one can sit here and say they're an expert in it because it's just not the case. It's something that we're all trying to wrap our heads around and it's a new directive and it is massive. If you've seen the requirements from an environmental, social and governance point of view, when I pull up the data points, it's so vast, and for any company that are jumping into that for the first time, it's going to be a really big headache. That's just the plain way to put it. So what we're doing with Tritech is we're actually preparing them for CSRD compliance in the best way we possibly can. And that involves going back, getting the information that we already have to date in terms of available energy information, policies, social initiatives, kind of the tracking that we have on gender equality or different like monetary data that we have on the business, and breaking it down so that when it comes to doing the CSRD report, we're able to just draw that data from where it already is and effectively just put it in to where it needs to go, so that we have a report prepared on time and that we're not dealing with any penalties or tax down the line.
And CSRD is coming. It is coming in 2025. It's a real thing.
Yes. Oh, it's so real. If you've seen my desktop every single day, you would know it's real. So CSRD is coming on everybody's agenda, and I think that a lot of companies are not going to realise it's there until someone comes knocking on their door to say we need to see your CSRD report. But CSRD also is really great because it aligns with a bunch of other standards, right? So you can see so much of the greenhouse gas protocol. You can see the IPCC's influence on the CSRD, and it's taken bunches of lots of other little directives that have been in the works over the last few years and piece them all together so that you have this really in-depth evaluation of a company's ESG commitments. So yeah, I think that anybody starting it for the first time really needs to do that preparation level, and that's what we're doing with Tritech. We're preparing them in the best way we possibly can. First with the carbon baseline assessment, which will gather all the data that they need then for the environmental aspect of the CSRD report. Then we're going to take that and push it forward and make sure that we're as set up as we possibly can be for that CSRD alignment in 2025.
So that's year 2.
Yes.
Okay, year 3 then is energy upgrades and financial strategy.
Yeah, so the energy upgrades and financial strategy will come massively out of our results of the carbon baseline assessment. Because, like I said, we could start on step 3, but we'd be going in blindsided. You really need to do the background work in order to make sure that your strategy is going to be, number one, cost effective, because that's a big thing for a company too. But that you're kind of doing this double materiality assessment so that you're really going into your sustainability strategy with companies' finances and growth in front of them too, or aligned with them, which I think makes more sense. So yeah, that's a big part of what we're doing there.
Okay, and then year 4 is water and waste management. This is going to be 2028.
Yeah, so the water and waste management will come, I think, earlier. I think for 2028, what we want to do is see the biggest results in our water and waste management. The structures will likely be set up in year 2, so ensuring that there's effective waste collection operations, or I don't know how you want to say that, in place on site, first of all. Yeah, segregation and so on, which a lot of that has already been done.
Yeah.
But you can push the boundaries so far with this. I mean, especially in relation to food or some of the maybe waste components that people don't consider on site. So yeah, I think for 2028, it's more so seeing results there and pushing it in order to make sure that we meet our targets.
Performance beyond compliance.
Exactly.
And then year 5 is sustainability strategy revision.
Yes, so I think that this is a really important thing, and we started a sustainability strategy with another company 5 years ago, and now we're coming to that level. What you're going to see is the technologies that I'm talking about now, and if we watch this video back in 5 years' time, we'll think, oh my God, how did we think that was going to completely save us? Because it's only going to make so much of a dent in hitting your targets, right? We revised a recent plan with another client, and we said, no, mark that off, mark that off, mark that off. Technologies that we thought were going to be massive in 2024. Now we're saying, no, scrap that, bring in these ones instead, because these are going to have a bigger effect. The likes of heat pumps. Like we thought gas boilers were the best thing ever 3 years ago. Now everyone's looking to get out their gas boilers and to get heat pumps in. So I think that the really important part of the year 5 is digging apart again what we done this year and saying, okay, well, we need to keep moving forward with these measures. These have worked really well. But that bespokeness and the stuff that's going to be individual to Tritech is also breaking down some of the advancements, like, let's say, moving abroad or moving international or growth, just in general growth, and saying, well, now actually this we need to get this certification under our belt, or we need to align with a new standard, or we need to take measures on this site because it's bringing us down here. It's just going to be looking at the mapping and the different data.
Visibility.
Yes, and I think that that's really important, having that oversight from the carbon perspective, also from the energy perspective, which will be a big part of improving the energy management and how they're effectively tracking everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything, not just meters. We're talking about pulse meters. We're talking about how we can put pulse measurements on waste and whatnot. And using that data and that groundwork that we're going to be putting in over the next 2 years to have that visibility to make the correct calls or the correct strategies in 5 years' time.
And respond, if new technologies emerge, respond by incorporating those new technologies into your strategy.
Exactly. And they will emerge.
Yes.
You know, like the sustainability landscape is ever changing, and I can't even keep up with it, and I'm a professional in the space and also completely passionate in my personal life. Even with CSRD, like you saying, well, explain that one, or what's that one? Like, there's acronyms out there that I don't know, that people are saying to me, and I kind of have to go back and research and say, what was that acronym that they came up with, another new directive coming down the line? But the important thing is staying as on track in that landscape as you possibly can, and being prepared for change. It's not always being completely ahead of the curve in action. It's being aligned with what's currently out there for you from the EU or from Ireland or wherever your push is coming from, a framework perspective or a standard perspective, and aligning with that and ensuring that you have the right tools in place to make sure that if something comes, boom, a new directive or any issue that you have that's going to affect your sustainability strategy, you're able to take action on it straight away. And that's what the oversight gives you, and digging into the data gives you that oversight.
I've noticed now, LEED used to be kind of commercial office buildings used to target LEED, but now I've noticed that, you know, pharmaceutical and manufacturing facilities are targeting LEED, data centres are targeting LEED, and I'm just aware of it, and I'm just wondering, will the data that Tritech are collecting assist with contributing to LEED credits?
LEED is a certification process that is effectively a questionnaire, okay? You have a set of requirements, you either meet them or you don't meet them, and you meet them by supplying documentation to back up the claims that you're going to do the work. With Tritech, something that we actually worked on a few months ago was delivering a new level of education and transparency when working on LEED projects. So having as much information up front as we can possibly have to hand over to any clients involved, so that from the start that connection on communication is established between them and, let's say, the architects or the client or whoever else is working on the project. But also it means that when Tritech comes to a certain credit or they come to a certain obligation, even with CSRD, because it's the same, like looking at any of those sustainability frameworks, it's the same process. You have a requirement, you have a documentation requirement, you supply it to supply the proof, or you don't because you're not able to comply with it. Gathering all that information means that you can tick off 20 or 30 more boxes than you would have been able if you're not doing that work. And I see it every day in ESG reports and sustainability reports where, you know, people are backtracking because they say, we need an ESG report, we need a sustainability report. And it was the same thing when we first started talking with Tritech, and then we said, no, we need to do all this background work to make sure that every single aspect that we're communicating online on the website, in our ESG report, in our CSRD report, in our sustainability communications is there in data for whoever wants it to say, this is the work we're doing and there's the proof to back it up.